When I signed the divorce papers back in July 2016, I thought it would be one of the darkest days of my life. The ink dried on the page, marking the end of a 12-year marriage that I once thought was built on trust and love. But my ex-husband, shattered that illusion with his infidelity. To me, cheating was the ultimate betrayal, one that I could neither excuse nor forgive. The love I once felt for him evaporated the moment I saw the texts, the late-night messages, and the unmistakable guilt written all over his face when I confronted him. Everyone around me had an opinion on what I should do next. Try to forgive him for the sake of the marriage, my mother-in-law said. You're throwing away years of your life over a simple mistake, another friend chimed in. But no one asked me how I felt, whether I could look at him the same way ever again, whether I could stomach sharing a home with someone who thought so little of our vows. The worst of it came from my mother-in-law, whose attempts at persuasion bordered on absurdity. Men are wired to cheat. It's just in their nature, she declared, as though that was supposed to comfort me, as if reducing my ex-husband's actions to some primal instinct would make it any less painful. And besides, she added, her voice lowering as though she was sharing some great wisdom, your father-in-law cheated on me and I stayed. Marriage is about compromise. The audacity of that statement left me speechless. Was I supposed to see her endurance of decades-long infidelity as a badge of honor? If anything, it made me pity her. But I knew one thing for sure. I would not be her. I would not sacrifice my self-respect for the hollow shell of a marriage. When I told her as much, her face darkened. You'll regret this, she spat. No man is perfect. At least you knew what you had. I stayed silent. But deep down, I knew I would never regret leaving a man who didn't value me. And as time went on, I began to wonder how long it would take for my ex-husband's shiny new life with his mistress-turned-wife to crack under the weight of its own lies. It didn't take long for word to reach me about my ex-husband's new marriage. I wasn't surprised when I heard he had married the woman he had cheated on me with. It seemed fitting, really. After all, they deserved each other. At first, I tried not to think about it. What they did wasn't my problem anymore. I told myself to focus on my own life, my own healing. But every now and then, curiosity got the better of me. A mutual friend, who always seemed to enjoy bringing me updates I didn't ask for, couldn't resist telling me about their wedding. It was a small, intimate ceremony, she said. They looked really happy. Happy. That word stung, but I kept my expression neutral. They've only been married 1.5 years, I replied coolly. Let's see how long that lasts. At first, I thought I was being petty. Maybe I still held on to a kernel of bitterness, even though I had no desire to get back together with him. But as the months passed, that same mutual friend came to me with a new revelation. You'll never guess what I heard, she said, her eyes gleaming with barely contained glee. His new wife has been cheating on him. I laughed out loud before I could stop myself. Not out of joy or malice, but at the sheer irony of it all. My ex-husband, who had blown up our marriage because he couldn't stay faithful, now found himself on the receiving end of the same betrayal. Are you serious? I asked, trying to hide my amusement. Dead serious. Apparently, he found some texts on her phone. He confronted her, and she didn't even deny it. I shook my head, feeling a strange mix of vindication and pity. Karma really does work, doesn't it? From that moment on, I couldn't help but feel like an audience member at some absurd drama playing out in real time. According to my friend, my ex-husband was spiraling. He had tried to play it cool at first, pretending he was unbothered by his wife's infidelity. But the cracks were beginning to show. He's miserable, my friend reported one day. He's constantly complaining about how she's never home, how she doesn't respect him. But he won't leave her. Why not? I asked, genuinely curious. Probably because he doesn't want to admit he was wrong, she said with a shrug. He's the one who left you for her. Can you imagine how embarrassing it would be for him if it ended now? I didn't say it out loud, but I thought to myself, embarrassment should be the least of his worries. As the months went on, I couldn't help but feel a strange satisfaction watching his life unravel. Not because I wanted him to suffer, well, not too much, but because it felt like justice. He had destroyed our marriage for a woman who clearly didn't care about him any more than he cared about me. And now, he was reaping what he had sown. One evening, as I sat on my balcony with a glass of wine, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened. If you had told me 3 years ago that I would one day feel at peace about my divorce, I wouldn't have believed you. At the time, it felt like the end of the world. But now, I could see it for what it really was. A blessing in disguise. Sure, the betrayal hurt. But it also forced me to reevaluate my life, my values, and what I wanted in a partner. It taught me to set boundaries and to never settle for less than I deserved. Most importantly, it showed me that I was stronger than I ever realized. As for my ex-husband, I didn't feel sorry for him. He had made his bed, and now he had to lie in it. But a small part of me hoped he would learn from this experience. Maybe, just maybe, he would finally understand what it felt like to be betrayed by someone you trusted. The last I heard, my ex-husband was still trying to salvage his crumbling marriage. He had forgiven his wife, at least on the surface, but the trust between them was shattered. According to our mutual friend, they were both miserable, clinging to a relationship that was doomed from the start. As for me, life had never been better. I had started dating again, cautiously at first, but with an open heart. I met someone who valued honesty and loyalty, someone who treated me with the respect I had always deserved. For the first time in years, I felt truly happy. One day, I ran into my ex-husband at a grocery store. He looked tired, worn down by the weight of his mistakes. He offered me a weak smile, and for a moment, I considered saying something snarky. But instead, I simply nodded and walked away. I didn't need revenge or validation. The universe had already taken care of that for me. I thought I'd feel nothing when I ran into my ex-husband at the grocery store. After all, our marriage was over and life had moved on. But as I pushed my cart through the narrow aisles, catching sight of his familiar silhouette from behind, an odd mixture of emotions washed over me. Nostalgia, amusement, and a faint sense of pity. He was standing in front of a shelf stacked with cereals, his shoulders slightly hunched, as though the weight of the world rested on them. His hair had thinned since I last saw him, and the lines around his eyes were deeper. He looked older, more defeated, and for a moment, I wondered if life had finally humbled him. When he turned and saw me, his eyes widened in surprise. For a fleeting second, I thought he might try to walk the other way. But instead, he hesitated, then gave me a tentative smile, the kind of smile that screamed discomfort. "Hi," he said awkwardly, his voice quieter than I remembered. "Hi," I replied simply, not bothering to feign enthusiasm. There was an awkward silence as we stood there, neither of us knowing what to say. It felt strange to see him like this, just a regular man in a grocery store, no longer the center of my universe, no longer the person who could hurt me. "How have you been?" he finally asked, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "Good," I said. "Really good." And it was the truth. He nodded, looking like he wanted to say more, but the words didn't come. Instead, he muttered something about needing to get going and shuffled away, his cart rattling noisily down the aisle. As I watched him leave, I felt a pang of something, not regret, exactly, but a bittersweet kind of closure. He wasn't the man I had loved anymore. He was just a shadow of his former self, and for the first time, I truly felt free. A few weeks later, I heard through the grapevine that my ex-husband's second marriage had officially ended. His wife had left him, and this time, she wasn't looking back. According to our mutual friend, the final straw had been an explosive fight that spilled out into the open during a family gathering. His wife had been caught in yet another lie, and when he confronted her in front of everyone, she unleashed a torrent of insults that left no doubt about how she really felt. "You think you're so much better than me," she had reportedly yelled. "You're just as bad. You cheated on your first wife to be with me. What did you think would happen?" Ouch. Apparently, the humiliation was too much for my ex to bear. He had spent the weeks following the fight drowning in self-pity, blaming everyone but himself for his failed marriage. "It's karma," our mutual friend said with a shrug when she told me the story. "He's finally getting what he deserves." I couldn't argue with that. One evening, as I sat on my couch with a glass of wine, I found myself thinking about everything that had happened. The betrayal, the divorce, the years of pain and healing, it all felt like a lifetime ago. And yet, there was one part of me that still wanted to say something to my ex, to put into words everything I had learned since we parted ways. So I grabbed a notebook and started to write. "Dear ex-husband, it's been years since our marriage ended, but I still think about it sometimes. Not because I miss you, but because I've learned so much about myself in the aftermath. When you cheated on me, I thought it was the worst thing that could ever happen. I felt broken, worthless, and betrayed. But looking back, I realized that your betrayal was a blessing in disguise. It forced me to confront truths I had been avoiding for years. You see, I don't hate you. I don't even resent you anymore. If anything, I pity you. You've spent your life chasing fleeting pleasures, lying to the people who loved you most, and for what? To end up alone, drowning in regret? I used to think your cheating was a reflection of me, that I wasn't good enough or beautiful enough or exciting enough to keep you. But now I know it had nothing to do with me. It was a reflection of your own emptiness, your own inability to appreciate what you had. I hope, for your sake, that you find peace one day. But more importantly, I hope you learn to stop hurting the people who love you. Sincerely, me. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer, knowing I would never send it. It wasn't for him, it was for me. Life has a funny way of moving on, even when you think it never will. After everything that had happened, I finally felt like I was in a good place. My career was thriving, my friendships were stronger than ever, and for the first time in years, I was starting to think about the possibility of love again. I met someone new, a kind, genuine man named Daniel. He was the complete opposite of my ex. Where my ex had been charming but deceitful, Daniel was steady and honest. He didn't play games or make grand promises he couldn't keep. He just showed up, day after day, proving with his actions that he was someone I could rely on. On our third date, as we walked through the park hand in hand, Daniel stopped suddenly and turned to me. "I don't know what your past looks like," he said, his voice soft but steady. "But I want you to know that I'm here for the future. Whatever that looks like, I'm all in." For the first time in years, I felt a lump in my throat that wasn't from sadness. It was from hope. One day, months after I had fully moved on with my life, I got an unexpected call from our mutual friend. "You're not going to believe this," she said, barely able to contain her laughter. "What?" I asked, already bracing myself for whatever ridiculous drama she was about to share. "Your ex-husband is trying to get back together with his first mistress," she said. "But she's not interested. Apparently, she's seeing someone else now." I couldn't help but laugh. It was like watching a soap opera unfold, only this time, I wasn't a character in the story. I was just an observer, sitting comfortably on the sidelines with my popcorn. As I hung up the phone, I felt a deep sense of gratitude, not for my ex-husband's misfortunes, but for the lessons his betrayal had taught me. It had taken years, but I had finally learned to trust myself again, to value my worth, and to never settle for less than I deserved. And as for him, well, karma had done its job.